In the shadows of Victorian London, amidst the fog and gaslight, women navigated the dangerous streets of Whitechapel. Their lives were marked by hardship and secrecy, often invisible to society's gaze. Tonight, we go there. The gas lamps flickered, casting a dim, wavering light over Whitechapel's cobblestone streets. Fog seeped between buildings, wrapping narrow alleys in a shroud of grey and blue. A lone woman walked with purpose, her skirts swaying slightly as she navigated the uneven stones. Her bonnet hid her face, but her form was unmistakable, resolute against the cold night air. The distant clatter of horse-drawn carriages mingled with the occasional shout from a late-night reveller, each sound swallowed by the enveloping mist. The cold bite of the night air clung to the cobblestones, a sharp contrast to the warm glow of gas lamps that flickered intermittently. A woman's silhouette moved down an alley, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders as she kept pace with the shadows. The scent of coal smoke and damp earth filled her lungs with each breath. Above, the sky was obscured by thick fog, a canvas of muted greys and blues. The distant echo of footsteps and hushed whispers added to the night's symphony of secrecy. The night air whispered secrets through Whitechapel's winding streets, where gas lamps flickered like spectral eyes. A woman moved through the fog, her coat a dark blur as she navigated the cobblestones. The sound of her footsteps was swallowed by the thick grey shroud that enveloped all. Above, the sky was an indistinct canvas of muted greys and blues, while below, coal smoke mingled with damp earth in the air. Each breath she took was a reminder of the world's indifference to her presence. The scent of coal and damp earth hung heavy in the air as a woman hurried down Whitechapel's narrow streets. Her bonnet shadowed her eyes, but her determined stride spoke volumes. Gaslight cast flickering shadows on the cobblestones, each step she took blending into the night symphony of hushed whispers and distant footsteps. The fog clung to everything, wrapping the world in a thick grey shroud that seemed to muffle even the loudest sounds. She moved with purpose, her form a dark silhouette against the muted greys and blues of the sky above. The clatter of horse hooves faded into the fog as a woman stepped from the shadows, her silhouette barely discernible against the dim glow of a flickering gas lamp. Her shawl billowed around her like a dark cloud as she moved through Whitechapel's labyrinthine streets. Each breath was a silent plea for warmth in the chill night air. The distant sound of laughter and hushed voices echoed from nearby alleys, blending into the symphony of the city's nocturnal life. Above, the sky was an indistinct canvas of muted greys and blues, a fitting backdrop to her invisible world. A woman's cloak rustled as she moved through Whitechapel's fog-laden streets, her steps barely audible against the cobblestones. The gas lamps cast long shadows that danced with each flicker of light. The chill seeped into everything, from the damp earth beneath to the coal smoke that mixed with the air. Above, the sky was a canvas of muted greys and blues, fitting for a world where her presence remained invisible. Each breath she took was a quiet defiance against the indifference of night. The distant chime of a church bell echoed through the fog, its toll barely audible over the whispering night. A woman paused beneath a flickering gas lamp, her bonnet obscuring her face as she scanned the dimly lit street. The cobblestones gleamed with moisture, reflecting the weak light in shattered fragments. Her shawl clung to her frame, a dark silhouette against the muted greys and blues of the sky above. Each step through the thick mist was a silent negotiation with the night's indifference. The night air was thick with the smell of coal and wet earth as a woman moved through Whitechapel's narrow alleys. Her shawl fluttered around her like a dark shadow, barely distinguishable from the fog that enveloped everything. Each step she took on the cobblestones was muffled by the damp, the only sound the distant hum of nocturnal life. The gas lamps flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. Above, the sky was an indistinct canvas of muted greys and blues, fitting for a world where her presence remained unseen. The sound of a door creaking open broke the silence, revealing a woman stepping into the narrow alley. Her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, shielding her from the biting cold and the prying eyes of the night. Gaslight flickered at the end of the alley, casting long shadows that danced on the damp cobblestones. The fog clung to everything, thickening the air with a sense of foreboding. Above, The sky was an indistinct canvas of muted greys and blues, fitting for a world where her presence remained unseen. The cold nipped at her skin as she pressed deeper into the fog-shrouded alleys of Whitechapel. Her shawl, a tattered shield against the night, fluttered with each gust of wind. The gas lamps provided only fleeting relief. Their light flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance and retreat in the thick mist. Each step was a silent testament to her resilience, her breath visible in the chill air like ghostly tendrils reaching out into the void. The rustle of her shawl was the only sound, a whisper against the night's silence. Cobblestones glistened underfoot, slick with moisture, and the occasional puddle reflecting weak gaslight. Shadows played along the walls as if alive, dancing to an unseen rhythm. Each breath she took was a small rebellion against the cold, her presence a flicker of defiance in a city that seemed intent on erasing all but its own indifference. The scent of damp earth and coal hung heavy in the air as she moved through Whitechapel's alleys. Her steps were careful on the glistening cobblestones, each one a silent dance with the night. Gas lamps flickered weakly, their light barely piercing the thick fog that clung to everything like a second skin. Above, the sky was an indistinct canvas of muted greys and blues, fitting for a world where her presence remained unseen. The distant clatter of a horse-drawn cart echoed through the fog as she navigated Whitechapel's narrow passages. Her shawl wrapped tightly around her, muffling the cold that seeped into every crevice. Gas lamps flickered weakly above, their light barely piercing the thick mist. Each step on the slick cobblestones was a careful balance between resilience and resignation. The folk seemed to whisper secrets, but offered no comfort in return. The gaslight cast long shadows across the cobblestones, each step a quiet crunch underfoot. The woman's shawl fluttered with the wind, her breath visible in the cold air like wisps of smoke. Above, the sky was obscured by a thick fog that clung to everything, muffling sounds and silhouettes alike. Each flicker of light from the gas lamps seemed to hesitate before disappearing into the mist, leaving only shadows to guide her way. The chill settled into her bones as she navigated the winding alleys. Each step on the slick cobblestones was a testament to her resolve, the gas lamps casting weak glows that barely pierced the dense fog. Her shawl clung to her like a second skin, muffling the sounds of the night and the distant echoes of footsteps. Above, the sky was an indistinct blur of greys, fitting for a world where the sound of her shawl rustling against the night air was a quiet counterpoint to the distant cries of street vendors. The cobblestones beneath her feet were slick with rain, each step a careful balance between lightness and certainty. Gas lamps flickered weakly above, casting an amber glow that barely penetrated the thick fog. The sky above was an indistinct blur of greys and muted blues, fitting for a world where she moved unseen through shadows and whispers. The night enveloped her like a shroud, each step on the slick stones a silent testament to her resolve. Gas lamps flickered weakly above, their light barely cutting through the dense fog. Her breath misted in the cold air, wisps of smoke tracing her path. The distant cries of street vendors and the rustle of her shawl were the only sounds that broke the silence. Above, the sky was an indistinct blur, fitting for a world where she moved unseen. The cobblestones beneath her feet were slick with rain, each step a careful balance between lightness and certainty. The gas lamps flickered weakly above, casting an amber glow that barely penetrated the thick fog. Her shawl clung to her like a second skin, muffling the sounds of the night and the distant echoes of footsteps. The air smelled of coal smoke and damp earth, heavy with secrets that lingered in the mist. Each flicker of light from the gas lamps seemed to hesitate before disappearing into the grey murk, leaving only shadows to guide her way. The distant toll of a church bell cut through the fog, its echo lingering like a ghostly whisper. She moved with purpose down the narrow alley, her shawl a silent companion in the night. Each gas lamp flickered weakly, casting long shadows that danced across the slick cobblestones. Above, the sky was an indistinct blur of greys and muted blues, fitting for a world where she remained unseen. The air smelled of coal smoke and damp earth, heavy with secrets that lingered in the thick mist. Her footsteps were silent, each step a careful balance between lightness and certainty. The cold night air clung to her skin like a second layer of flesh. Each step echoed faintly on the slick cobblestones, her boots barely disturbing the thick fog that enveloped Whitechapel. Above, gas lamps flickered weakly, casting an amber glow that struggled against the pervasive darkness. Her shawl rustled softly with each movement, a quiet whisper in a world of muted shadows and secrets. The air was heavy with the scent of coal smoke and damp earth, a constant reminder of the hidden lives she navigated. The sound of her boots scraping against the slick cobblestones was a whisper in the night. Above, gas lamps flickered weakly, casting an amber glow that barely pierced the thick fog. Her shawl rustled softly with each step, a muted symphony in a world of shadows and secrets. The air smelled of coal smoke and damp earth, heavy with the unseen lives she navigated. Each shadow seemed to hold its own silent story, waiting to be told. The distant murmur of voices faded into the fog, a chorus of whispers in the night. She moved through the narrow streets, each gas lamp barely piercing the thick mist that clung to every surface. Her shawl rustled softly with each step, blending seamlessly into the muted symphony of the unseen world. Above, the sky was an indistinct blur, fitting for a city where shadows held their own silent stories. The air smelled of coal smoke and damp earth, heavy with secrets that lingered in the thick fog. The scent of coal smoke and damp earth was a constant companion as she moved through the narrow, winding streets. Each gas lamp cast a flickering amber glow that barely pierced the thick fog, leaving shadows to dominate the scene. Her shawl rustled softly with each step, blending into the muted symphony of the unseen world. The distant sound of footsteps echoed faintly in the night, a reminder of the hidden lives she navigated. Above, the indistinct sky was a blur of greys and blues, fitting for a city where secrets lingered like ghosts. The gas lamp above her flickered, casting an amber glow that barely pierced the thick fog. Her shawl rustled softly with each step, a quiet whisper in the night. The cobblestones were slick underfoot, and she moved carefully, aware of every shadow that seemed to hold its own silent story. The air was heavy with coal smoke and damp earth, a constant reminder of the unseen lives she navigated. Each distant sound, a cough, a hushed conversation, echoed faintly in the fog, adding to the tapestry of secrets that lingered. The cold, damp earth pressed against her boots as she moved through the narrow lanes. Each step was a deliberate act of survival in the thick fog that enveloped Whitechapel like a shroud. Above, gas lamps flickered weakly, their amber glow barely reaching through the mist. Her shawl rustled softly with each movement, blending into the muted symphony of unseen lives and whispered secrets. The distant sound of footsteps echoed faintly, a reminder of the hidden world she navigated. The distant sound of a horse-drawn cart echoed through the fog, its wheels creaking on the slick cobblestones. She paused beneath a flickering gas lamp, its amber glow barely reaching her face shrouded in shadow. Each breath was a mist in the cold night air, and the scent of coal smoke mingled with the damp earth underfoot. The fog obscured everything, turning Whitechapel into a ghostly labyrinth where only whispers and shadows remained. The distant chime of a church bell echoed faintly through the fog, marking time in this spectral world. She paused at a cross street, her shawl wrapped tightly against the chill. Above, gas lamps cast weak amber pools that barely illuminated the cobblestones. Each breath was a plume of mist, and the scent of coal smoke and damp earth clung to everything. Shadows loomed large, silent guardians of unseen lives. The fog whispered secrets as she continued her journey, a solitary figure in the night. The flickering gaslight above her cast long shadows across the cobblestones, barely illuminating her path through the thick fog. Her shawl rustled softly with each step as she navigated the narrow lanes of Whitechapel. The air was heavy with coal smoke and damp earth, a constant reminder of the city's relentless embrace. Each distant sound, a cough, a hushed conversation, echoed faintly in the night, weaving into the tapestry of unseen lives that lingered like ghosts. The chill of the night pressed against her skin, and she tightened her shawl around her shoulders. The gas lamps above cast weak amber light that barely pierced the thick fog, turning Whitechapel into a ghostly maze. Each step was measured, careful on the slick cobblestones. The air smelled of coal smoke and damp earth, heavy with secrets and unseen lives. A distant cough echoed faintly, a reminder of the hidden world she navigated through the misty night. The distant echo of a hushed conversation drifted through the fog, barely audible over the creaking wheels of a passing cart. Her shawl clung to her shoulders as she moved along the narrow lane, each step a careful test on the slick cobblestones. Gas lamps flickered weakly above, casting amber pools that barely pierced the thick mist enveloping Whitechapel. The air was heavy with coal smoke and damp earth, a constant reminder of the city's relentless embrace. Shadows loomed large, silent guardians of unseen lives. The scent of coal smoke and damp earth hung in the air as she walked, her shawl a shield against the biting cold. Each step on the slick cobblestones was a deliberate action, navigating through the thick fog that enveloped Whitechapel like a shroud. A distant hoot from an unseen night watchman echoed faintly, piercing the silence briefly before fading back into the mist. Above, gas lamps flickered weakly, casting amber pools of light that barely illuminated her path. Shadows danced around her, silent witnesses to the hidden lives that thrived in this spectral world. The gas lamp above flickered, casting a wavering light over the slick cobblestones. Her shawl rustled softly with each step as she moved through the thick fog, her breath visible in the cold air. A stray cat darted between shadows, its eyes gleaming like tiny lanterns. The night was alive with whispers and distant footsteps, a symphony of muted sounds that wove through the mist. Coal smoke mingled with damp earth, creating an atmosphere heavy with secrets and unseen lives. The night was a thick blanket of fog, heavy and oppressive. Her breath hung in the air like ghostly wisps as she moved through the narrow lanes of Whitechapel. Each step on the slick cobblestones sent ripples through the silence, a quiet echo that faded into the mist. A distant cry pierced the air, sharp and urgent, a reminder of the unseen lives that thrived in this spectral world. The gas lamps flickered weakly, casting amber pools of light that barely illuminated her path. The distant chime of Big Ben drifted through the fog, a ghostly echo that seemed to hang in the air. Her shawl was heavy with dew as she moved silently along the lane, each step measured against the slick cobblestones. A faint cough from an alleyway drew her attention, a shadowy figure huddled against the cold. The gas lamps flickered weakly overhead, casting amber pools that barely pierced the thick mist enveloping Whitechapel. Shadows danced around her like silent sentinels. The scent of damp earth and coal smoke clung to the night air, a constant reminder of the city's unyielding presence. Her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Each step on the slick cobblestones was deliberate, testing the ground beneath her feet. A low murmur from an alleyway, barely audible over the distant rumble of carts, hinted at unseen lives. Gas lamps flickered weakly above, casting amber pools that struggled against the thick fog enveloping Whitechapel. The distant rumble of a passing cart faded into the thick fog, leaving only the soft patter of her boots on wet cobblestones. Her shawl clung to her shoulders, heavy with moisture and the weight of unseen eyes. A stray dog barked sharply from an alleyway before falling silent again, its echo swallowed by the mist. The gas lamps flickered weakly above, casting amber pools that struggled to pierce the enveloping fog. Shadows swirled around her like silent sentinels, guarding secrets hidden within Whitechapel's spectral embrace. The night air clung to her like a shroud, damp and cold. Each breath was a whisper against the fog, mingling with the distant hum of London's unseen life. Her boots slipped on the slick cobblestones as she navigated the narrow lanes of Whitechapel. A flicker from an oil lamp cast amber light onto the wet stones, briefly illuminating the path before fading back into shadow. The gas lamps overhead struggled to pierce the thick mist, their weak glow barely reaching her face. The night was a thick, unyielding blanket of fog that swallowed the cobblestones. Her shawl clung to her like a second skin, heavy with dew and the unseen gazes of those who lurked in shadows. A distant bell tolled, its echo fading into the mist. Each step on the slick stones sent ripples through the silence, a quiet whisper against the cold. Gas lamps flickered weakly overhead, casting amber pools that struggled to pierce the enveloping fog. The cold whispered through the narrow lanes, a spectral echo of unseen footsteps. Her shawl tangled around her as she moved through the fog, each step a careful balance on slick cobblestones. A distant siren wailed, its sound swallowed by the thick mist that clung to every surface. Gas lamps cast weak amber pools that flickered against the night, barely illuminating the path ahead. Shadows shifted and swayed like silent watchers in the enveloping fog. The sound of her footsteps was muffled by the thick fog that enveloped Whitechapel. Her shawl, heavy with moisture, dragged against her back as she moved through the narrow lanes. A distant train whistle echoed through the mist, its sound fading into silence. Gas lamps flickered weakly above, casting amber pools that barely illuminated the path ahead. The air was thick with coal smoke and damp earth, each breath a reminder of the relentless night. The scent of coal smoke and damp earth filled her lungs with each breath. The gas lamps above flickered weakly, casting a wavering amber light that barely pierced the thick fog. Her shawl clung to her like a second skin, heavy from the moisture. A low murmur of voices drifted from an alleyway, swallowed by the mist before she could make out words. Each step on the slick cobblestones sent ripples through the silence. The night air clung to her like a damp shroud, heavy with the scent of coal smoke and wet earth. Shadows danced in the wavering light of gas lamps, barely piercing the thick fog that enveloped Whitechapel. Her shawl, soaked through, dragged against her back as she navigated the slick cobblestones. A distant cry was swallowed by the mist, leaving only silence behind. Each step sent a ripple of sound into the night, a quiet echo in the cold embrace of the fog. The cobblestones beneath her feet felt like cold, wet stones, slick from the mist that clung to everything. A distant clock tower chimed, its tolls muted by the thick fog. She paused at a cross street where shadows merged into an indistinct blur under wavering gaslight. Each breath she took was heavy with the scent of coal smoke and damp earth, a constant reminder of her surroundings. The night seemed to press in around her, isolating her within its shroud. The distant cry of a barking dog broke the silence, its echo swallowed by the thick fog. She paused at an intersection where shadows merged into indistinct blurs under wavering gaslight. Each breath she took was heavy with coal smoke and damp earth, a constant reminder of her surroundings. A cold wind whispered through the narrow lanes, tugging at her shawl, which clung to her like a second skin. The night seemed to press in around her, isolating her within its shroud. The sound of distant footsteps echoed through the mist, barely discernible over the creaking of wooden boards underfoot. Gas lamps flickered weakly, casting long shadows that danced along the walls and ground. Her shawl clung to her like a damp cloak, heavy from the chill and moisture. Each breath she took was thick with coal smoke and wet earth, the fog pressing in around her as if trying to smother sound and light alike. The night's damp chill seeped into her bones, and the gas lamps seemed to struggle against the thick fog that enveloped Whitechapel. Each step on the slick cobblestones was a quiet creak underfoot, the sound swallowed by the dense mist. Her shawl clung tightly, heavy with moisture, as she moved through the narrow lanes. The air carried the acrid scent of coal smoke, mingling with the earthy smell of damp ground. Shadows danced in the wavering light, and each breath was a reminder of the cold embrace that surrounded her. The gas lamps flickered, barely piercing the thick fog that enveloped Whitechapel. Each step on the slick cobblestones was a quiet creak underfoot, swallowed by the dense mist. Her shawl clung tightly to her frame, heavy with moisture, as she moved through the narrow lanes. Shadows danced along the walls and ground, merging into indistinct blurs under the wavering light. The air carried the acrid scent of coal smoke, mingling with the damp earth, a constant reminder of her surroundings. The distant rumble of a passing carriage echoed through the mist, its wheels sinking into the damp cobblestones. She paused beneath an archway where shadows pooled like still water, the gaslight above barely reaching her face. The cold wind tugged at her shawl, and she wrapped it tighter around herself, feeling the chill seep into her bones. Each breath was a mix of coal smoke and wet earth, a constant reminder of her isolation in this fog-shrouded world. The scent of rain-soaked brick filled her nostrils as she turned a corner, gas lamps barely illuminating the narrow lane. Shadows seemed to stretch and reach for one another in the gloom, their forms indistinct against the cold walls. Each step on the slick cobblestones was a quiet click underfoot, swallowed by the thick fog that enveloped Whitechapel. Her shawl clung tightly, heavy with moisture, as she moved through the night. The air carried whispers of coal smoke and damp earth, a constant reminder of her surroundings. The chill of the night pressed against her skin, each breath a thin mist that vanished into the fog. A distant cry echoed through Whitechapel's narrow lanes, barely audible over the creaking boards beneath her feet. Her shawl, damp and heavy, clung to her frame like a second skin. Shadows danced in the wavering light of gas lamps, merging into indistinct blurs that seemed to watch from every corner. The air was thick with coal smoke and wet earth, a constant reminder of the cold embrace she could not escape. The cold wind whispered through the narrow lanes, carrying with it the distant clatter of horse hooves. Each step she took on the slick cobblestones was a quiet crunch underfoot, lost in the thick fog that enveloped Whitechapel. Her shawl, damp and heavy, clung to her frame like a second skin, offering little warmth against the chill. Shadows danced along the walls, merging into indistinct blurs under the wavering light of gas lamps. The air was thick with coal smoke and wet earth, a constant reminder of the night's relentless embrace. The distant toll of a church bell cut through the fog, echoing in the narrow lanes. She moved with practiced silence along the cobblestones, her shawl heavy with moisture, clinging to her form like a second skin. Shadows seemed to reach out from the walls, merging into indistinct blurs under the wavering light of gas lamps. The air was thick with coal smoke and damp earth, each breath a mix of cold and soot. Her footsteps were lost in the fog's embrace, another quiet whisper in Whitechapel's night. The sound of her steps was swallowed by the thick fog, each crunch on the slick cobblestones barely audible. She moved with practiced ease through Whitechapel's narrow lanes, her shawl heavy and damp against her skin. Gas lamps flickered intermittently, casting wavering shadows that danced across cold brick walls. A distant cry echoed, mingling with the constant hum of coal smoke and wet earth in the air. Her breaths were quiet clouds in the night, a reminder of her solitude. The night was a thick, silent blanket over Whitechapel. A single gas lamp flickered weakly at the end of an alley, casting eerie shadows that seemed to writhe and twist in the gloom. Her steps were muffled by the wet cobblestones, each one a quiet echo swallowed by the fog. The air was heavy with coal smoke and damp earth, a constant reminder of her surroundings. Shadows clung to every corner, merging into indistinct blurs that seemed to watch from the darkness. The scent of coal mingled with the damp earth as she moved through Whitechapel's winding streets. Each step on the slick cobblestones was a quiet dance in the thick fog, her shawl heavy and sodden against her skin. Gas lamps flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows that danced along cold brick walls, merging into indistinct blurs. A distant cry echoed through the lanes, barely audible over the creaking of wooden boards beneath her feet. The air was thick with smoke and moisture, a constant reminder of her solitary journey. The distant glow of a gas lamp flickered through the fog, illuminating patches of damp cobblestones. Her shawl, heavy with moisture, hung like a cloak of sorrow around her shoulders. Each step she took echoed softly in the silence, lost to the thick mist that enveloped Whitechapel. Shadows stretched across the narrow alleyways, merging into indistinct forms under the wavering light. The air was thick with coal smoke and damp earth, each breath a reminder of the cold night's unyielding grip. The sound of her breath was the only thing breaking the silence, a soft, foggy whisper that barely escaped into the night. Each step on the slick cobblestones sent ripples through the thick mist, her shawl heavy with moisture like a wet cloak. Gas lamps flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows across cold brick walls and merging into indistinct blurs. The air was thick with coal smoke and damp earth, each breath a reminder of the night's oppressive embrace. The cold seeped into her bones as she walked the narrow lanes of Whitechapel, each step a quiet whisper on the damp cobblestones. Shadows clung to the walls like wet rags, and the flickering gas lamps cast an eerie glow that barely pierced the thick fog. A distant holler echoed through the alleys, lost in the constant hum of coal smoke and wet earth. Her shawl was heavy with moisture, a silent companion in the night's oppressive embrace. The wet cobblestones creaked under her feet, a low, mournful sound that echoed through the narrow lanes. Her shawl dragged against the ground, heavy and sodden. A faint cry pierced the fog, distant and swallowed by the night's thick silence. Gas lamps cast wavering shadows on cold brick walls, merging into indistinct blurs that seemed to watch from the darkness. The air was a constant mix of coal smoke and damp earth, each breath a reminder of her solitude in Whitechapel's unyielding embrace. The chill of the night clung to her like a second skin, seeping through layers of worn clothing. Each breath she took was a sharp reminder of the cold as it bit into her lungs. The gas lamps cast weak light, barely enough to pierce the thick fog that enveloped Whitechapel's narrow lanes. Shadows danced along the walls, merging into indistinct shapes under the wavering glow. Her shawl, heavy with moisture, dragged against her feet with each step she took. The distant sound of footsteps echoed softly, a faint reminder of unseen others in the night. The distant hoot of an owl echoed through the fog, barely discernible over the constant whisper of Whitechapel's night. Her shawl clung to her like a second skin, heavy with moisture that seeped into every crevice. Gas lamps cast weak, wavering light across damp cobblestones, their glow barely piercing the thick mist. Shadows danced and merged on cold brick walls, indistinct shapes watching from the darkness. The air was thick with coal smoke and damp earth, each breath a sharp reminder of the unyielding night. The distant clatter of a horse-drawn cart faded into the fog, leaving only the soft rustle of her skirts against damp cobblestones. Each step was a deliberate effort through the thick mist that enveloped Whitechapel's narrow lanes. Gas lamps cast weak, wavering light, barely enough to distinguish the cold brick walls from shadows. The air smelled of coal smoke and wet earth, each breath a sharp reminder of the night's oppressive grip. The sound of dripping water echoed faintly from a nearby alley, a melancholic rhythm in the stillness. Her shawl, heavy with moisture, wrapped tightly around her as she navigated Whitechapel's narrow lanes. Gas lamps flickered weakly, their light barely piercing the thick fog that clung to everything like a damp veil. Shadows merged into indistinct shapes on cold brick walls, watching in silence. The air was thick with coal smoke and wet earth, each breath a sharp reminder of her solitude. The smell of coal smoke mingled with the earthy dampness that clung to every surface. Her shawl, heavy and sodden, dragged against her legs as she moved through Whitechapel's narrow lanes. Gas lamps cast weak light, barely enough to distinguish the cold brick walls from shadows. Each breath was a sharp reminder of the night's oppressive grip. The distant sound of footsteps faded into the fog, leaving only the soft rustle of her skirts against wet cobblestones. The night air was thick with the scent of coal smoke and damp earth, each breath a sharp reminder of her surroundings. Her shawl clung to her like a wet cloak, heavy with moisture that seeped into every layer of clothing. Gas lamps flickered weakly, casting wavering light across cold cobblestones barely visible through the fog. Shadows merged into indistinct shapes on brick walls, watching silently from the darkness. The distant sound of footsteps faded into the mist, leaving only the soft rustle of her skirts against wet stones. The distant chime of a church bell echoed through the fog, barely audible over the soft whisper of her skirts brushing against wet cobblestones. Her shawl clung to her like a damp veil, heavy with moisture seeping into every fold. Gas lamps cast weak, wavering light across the cold stone pathways, their glow barely piercing the thick mist that enveloped Whitechapel's narrow lanes. Shadows merged into indistinct shapes on brick walls, watching silently from the darkness. The air was